Well, good morning. Or afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for staying, for coming out on this snowy day that we don't get very often. I'm Gail Reedy, and I'm currently the, facilitator chair of the Leadership Development Committee here at church. As many of you know, the LDC is responsible for three things here at the church. We're a committee of the board, and we're responsible for identifying people who have passion, skills, and availability to be serving as leaders in the church. We also identify each year people who can be candidates for either the board or the Leadership Development Committee, and we're right now in our recruitment phase. So if you're interested in either of those, please talk to myself or Des McGarren or Ann Colbury. Raise your hand, please. Or Josie Solzang, and Nancy Curtis isn't here today. So we have been talking for some time, because it is in the bylaws that we are responsible for leadership training. And there's an interesting dynamic. If you say leadership training, everybody goes, oh shoot, they're going to ask me to do something. So that didn't work using that term. So we started talking this year particularly, but over the last few years, about what are the components of good leadership. And clearly it's visioning and it's showing up. And a key one is communication. So we've been talking for quite some time about this training, and thankfully we have a fabulous resource in this community, the Dispute Resolution Center, who came to our aid to say that they could help us with this training. So with that, I'm going to let Des introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks a lot. We humans are social creatures, aren't we? We rely heavily on communication in our daily lives. Communication can bring about tremendous joy and happiness and can contribute to a sense of community and belonging, like we have here. Unfortunately, communication can also bring about tremendous hurt, harm, and isolation. We're very fortunate to have with us today Elizabeth Drake. It's great to have you, Elizabeth, an expert in the field of communication. I want to read you a little bit about her background. Elizabeth serves as the Executive Director of the Dispute Resolution Center of Thurston County, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering individuals to resolve conflicts through training and mediation services. In this role, Elizabeth provides visionary leadership to advance the DRC's mission while fostering collaborative partnerships in the community. As a certified mediator, Elizabeth has skills in effective communication, conflict resolution, collaborative negotiation, facilitation, restorative justice practices. Her extensive expertise as a social scientist, mediator, educator, writer, and leader allows her to strategically design and implement programs and policies that enhance the safety and well-being of individuals and communities alike. Dr. Drake brings 2 decades of public policy experience examining the effectiveness of criminal justice programs and beyond. As a member of the Police Use of Force Board, she volunteers her expertise to the Olympia Police Department. Elizabeth enjoys teaching at True Self Yoga and walking her dog. Please, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here, and also just want to acknowledge all the folks who are online as well. Thank you so much. If you have questions throughout, I invite you to ask those questions. We're going to have a microphone going around, and then I'm also going to save some time. Okay, yeah, save some time at the end for more Q&A. So that's a way for me to make sure that I'm carrying you along in this presentation, learning this information. So if you have those questions, please raise your hand, raise your digital hand as well. I also want to give some acknowledgement to Steve Tilley, who reached out to Des and said you should talk to Elizabeth. Steve and I share a passion for the criminal justice system in a lot of ways, and that's how I came across him. I became a mediator in 2019 and became involved and got to know Steve, and we have some overlapping interests there. And that's kind of where I hail from as a nonpartisan researcher and social scientist. I really became very interested in violence and nonviolent communication, and that's how I ended up really on this pathway. And for me, it's a really fun pathway to be on because I think that prevention and education is so important, and that's why I love being a part of this community and the nonprofit organization that I'm a part of. So, we are in very socially and politically divided times, no doubt. And compassionate communication is something that we all can do and all need to learn a little bit more how to do that. So I'm just going to cover 4 steps today, and this is about a 45-minute presentation in total. And I will tell you that our mediators, they go through a 40-hour training and then they do an intensive process to learn these skills. So if this feels like, wow, that's helpful information and I need to know more, you're not going to learn it all in this day, in this moment. But what I'm hoping is that you walk away with a few nuggets that are helpful to think about and reflect on and figure out how can I incorporate this more into me in my life and how I engage with people as you navigate in the world. So that's my best hope today for you in talking about compassionate communication in 4 steps. First, a little bit of a vision and mission of the DRC. Our vision is basically that we envision a South Sound community that has and uses healthy and respectful communication skills. And we aim to empower people to resolve their own disputes and really get them to self-navigate and be empowered to resolve their own disputes, with the belief that that autonomy and empowerment is really important as we all make individual different choices in our lives. We really value relationships and preserving and repairing relationships. So in that way, we ask people to come together and have authentic dialogue amongst one another. We also value diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and those are very important. It's a very important collection of individual values that we hold as a DRC and as a community mediation center. Historically, we came out of the Civil Rights Act and that movement, so we very much believe in providing people access to justice through our services. And our services, we offer those for negotiated rates so that anybody can participate either in mediation or training. And that's a really important value of ours, is making sure that we're accessible to our community. So this is why for us to be able to be invited to come here and share with you all, this is just a part of our mission. Part of what we do is sharing that information with you, and hope that you find value in that and also come to us as a trusted resource in this community. So we've been serving South Mason County and Thurston County since 1991. We have 2 kind of basic services: our conflict prevention, which is really thinking about training, things like this, engaging with the community, and training both for the public and for our mediators. We have 115 volunteer mediators who help carry out all the work that we do, and it's through them that we are able to make our services accessible and affordable for people. And also there are a little army of peacemakers that we have out in the world. So if you're interested in learning how to become a mediator, just let me know. We also do facilitation of meetings, and sometimes people or groups, they just need more space to help hold that space so that you can do your best work and come up with your own outcomes that you need to. So that's something that we also offer. And thinking about conflict resolution, this is often where we see people who are deep in conflict, And they call us up. Our phone line is available for people where we do conciliation and coaching to help coach you through problems. Maybe you're having problems with your neighbor or in the workplace or with a friend. It really could be anything. With family, we see a lot of family disputes. And what our phone services offer is basically a conflict coach on the phone to help you think about things that you have maybe tried, what's worked, what's not worked. And then if that's not working, then maybe possibly moving on to mediation and having two mediators at the table to help hold that space for you. And we do mediation, lots of two-party mediation, multiple-party mediation, especially with families and workplaces. We do a lot of work in the small claims court. And then, as Des mentioned too, we also do a little bit of work, restorative justice work, and I do that with Steve Tilley for our therapeutic courts here in the Superior Court in Thurston County. So lots of different kinds of conflict resolution that we offer. We're served about 9,000 people in the community last year. So we, through all sorts of our services, presentations, training, and mediation. So I'm very honored to be able to be in this position as the executive director of the DRC. I'm the third director now. Our founding father and founders are still around and working in our community. So I feel really grateful and honored to be able to have this important position. Okay, so now this is where we get into the learning piece. Compassionate communication. As I mentioned, this is thinking about nonviolent communication, which in some ways is a bit of a misnomer because people can maybe have that thought or sentiment of, I don't do violence. You know, we think about violence a lot of ways in a very physical kind of way, but I'm talking about do no harm and how to minimize harm even in our communication. As we know that words matter a lot, and people might interpret words very differently depending on the cultural context, or even just having misunderstandings of one another. So I bring this quote up because Marshall Rosenberg, he's the one who really coined the phrase nonviolent communication, and he's no longer in this world, but he came about really in the civil rights era and was a big follower of Martin Luther King, a follower of Gandhi, where he learned some of these tools and tactics and helped design nonviolent communication. So when we think about that, Marshall Rosenberg, it's a very specific sort of process. I'm not teaching you that specific process today, but I'm teaching you some of the important principles that really underlie that nonviolent communication. So, when I think about this quote, I love it. It says, "What I want in my life is compassion, a flow between myself and others based on a mutual giving from the heart." And I think what's really important about Marshall Rosenberg is that compassionate communication is about expressing yourself honestly and authentically. And it's also about really trying to stay focused and attuned to the needs of the other person and trying to be available for that. It's really very easy to, when people communicate, to take that information in as criticism or to take in feedback as criticism, and it's very easy then to go into defense mode. And so in this way, it's asking you to notice that rising up in you, that defensiveness or that critique that you're feeling, to notice that and really take a step back and say, what is this person really trying to say to me? Most of the time, what we hear as criticism is not criticism. It's actually a request from the other person. It's a way that they are trying to get their needs met. And if you can really set the stuff aside and get back more towards what does this person really need? What are they trying to communicate to me? Because most likely it's not about you at all. Most of the time it's not about you at all. And so this is way of really thinking about how to give from the heart and be there authentically and honestly and having that open dialogue. So it's a mindset that asks you to think about how to approach it just a little bit differently. Okay, step one. And I'm going to invite you also, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you have clarifying questions, let me know as we go along because I don't want to lose you. And I also want to save space at the very end so that there's more dialogue as well. Step one, building awareness of self and others. This is one of the most important pieces. And Des mentioned too that I'm a yoga instructor, and this is where my yoga world really matches up with the communication world. This concept of mindfulness becomes really very important. It has very much historic roots in ancient and indigenous practices that, as a social scientist, really fascinate me because with brain science and what we know about modern neuroscience is that these are actually really effective principles. So that's just something that just fascinates me as a person. So I would tell you that it's my belief that this is probably one of the most important steps in communication is building that awareness. So we like to think of lots of mental models at the DRC, and we use a lot of triangles, and this is one of them. So our awareness triangle is really about three things. Thoughts, all the things that are happening in your head. And I know there's a lot of them out there right now. I wonder about this. Where did she come from? What's happening? All the things, maybe worrying about the snow and am I going to get home on time before we get snowed in? This is how we think. We're humans. Our brains are designed to just go, 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 go. They don't always stop. And meditation is not necessarily about stopping the thoughts and getting control of the thoughts. It's about noticing the thoughts, really being observant about what's happening for you and honoring that. It would make sense that you're worried about getting home. It would make sense that you're worried about the snow right now. You value safety, right? So in that way, there are lots of things that are going on, both for yourself and for others. So just paying attention to what that is, the thoughts. Okay, feelings. The same goes true for feelings. And we don't know, it could be any number of things. It could be feeling a little bit anxious. I don't normally stand up in front of a microphone at a podium. That's not how I normally speak, so it feels a little bit different, a little bit anxious. Maybe you're happy to be here and getting this information, and just feeling that joy. That could be something that you're noticing, could be also something that's taking you away from really being able to fully engage with someone. And that's not necessarily bad. It's just about acknowledging what's going on in your body, in your own little world. And then thirdly, actually, let me go back to feelings because I do want to say one more important thing about feelings. Feelings they're really tied to deep-seated values. So they're a messenger to you about something that's really important. As I mentioned, anxiety and safety with the snow. So paying attention to what feelings are coming up for you, and then trying to tie that back to what is that important value? What is this feeling trying to say to me? That's a way of really figuring out or deconstructing in your own world what's going on for you. And oftentimes there's not even necessarily a lot of space in this really fast-paced world to do that deconstructing. So this is where the awareness model tries to bring some of the things that are happening really automatically. The awareness triangle tries to give you a little bit of distance between that so that you can do some of that deconstructing and figure out what's going on. Okay. So the third one, physical sensations. This might be a way in which you notice things happening in your body. Has anybody ever noticed physical sensations when they're feeling anxious? Yes. Beth, right? What have you noticed? Wait, sorry, microphone. Yes, you're on.
If I get really anxious, I get hot all over. I breathe rapidly, and I have to breathe to bring myself back into being mindful. Otherwise, my mind goes all over the place. So I've had free-floating anxiety most of my life, so I've had to learn how to deal with it. But you know, a lot of times people will say, well, just don't be anxious. Okay, but, you know, there are ways to work with it, and I'm not medicated, so, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Beth. I also go by Beth in my life as well. Yeah, I also I've dealt with anxiety my whole life, and one of the things that has really helped me is not only the DRC and this course and learning these communication tools, but this awareness piece and just noticing what's going on. For me, helps name it to tame it. So if you know where you're coming from, what you know and what you're aware of, you can have control over. And these physical sensations can happen for lots of different types of feelings, and they might rise up in you. So just paying attention to what those are can be the first indicator of, oh, I'm sweating. I realize I'm more anxious than I thought I was. So really paying attention to all three of these indicators. Thanks for sharing, Beth. Okay, any questions on the awareness triangle before I move to step 2? I think what I'll close with on the awareness triangle actually is that once you can start to use this tool for yourself, you can also start to notice it in other people. And that's the key. I'm seeing that that's connecting with you. Yeah. This is really helpful for me because sometimes if my husband and I are not connecting, I might notice he is clearly very stressed out, you know, and then realize, okay, he's not listening to me to be a mean man. He's not listening to me because his triangle's going off the charts and he's got a lot of things going on too. So once you can use this tool for yourself, you can start to think about it for others as well. Really critical. Okay, step 2, get curious about differences. Now, I heard a quote from Brene Brown once about get curious or go crazy. And I like that quote in certain ways. Some people maybe take offense to the word crazy, and I can understand that too. But what I like about this quote is that it really says, like, to get curious, to ask more questions, to wonder why, what's going on for somebody, you know, because the experience that we're having in our own bodies and our own selves, we often project that out on the people that we interact with. Oh, they must know exactly what I'm talking about. People are different, very different from one another. So not just making assumptions that happen automatically, biases can happen automatically. And again, if we're invoking that awareness triangle, that gives us that space and distance to be able to get more curious about differences and say, tell me more about that. So there are differences in how people even navigate in conflict and conflict styles. And Thomas Kilman has the conflict styles. You can Google him and take the quiz and find out which conflict style you are and read a little bit more on conflict styles. We spend a solid hour doing this segment in our 40-hour mediation training. The important thing, instead of going into these different styles, because you can get a sense of what they are just by reading the words, but the important thing to know about conflict styles is that everybody has a different conflict style, and everybody is going to engage with their conflict style differently depending on the context. So it's good to know that no one style is the best style to be in. And it's good to know how to flex between those styles. You know, if you're a competitor, the sports arena is going to be great for you. You know, that's where you want to compete. You know, if you're trying to win an argument with your partner, your wife, your husband, maybe that's not where you want to win, you know? What's your goal? So really thinking about how you're coming into the conflict, and think about how the other person is showing up in the conflict. as an introverted processor, when I am up against a debater, I'm like, ah, it's too much for me. I need a little bit, maybe more space. So knowing that someone is an engager, a competitor, and they want to debate with you because that's so much fun to them, that is not fun to me at all. So just knowing that you have a different style from the people you're engaging with is really important place to start. The relationship stakes really matter too. So if you're coming back to the example of a partner or children, if the stakes are really high with that relationship, well, maybe that's the time where you accommodate a little bit more, maybe even avoid some conflict. Avoiding conflict can be good, and avoiding conflict can create more conflict. I grew up in a conflict avoider household. And so both of my parents, very much conflict avoiders. Not necessarily a great strategy when the relationship is very much at stake and they are no longer together. I love them and love them separately, so they work best that way. So knowing, when you need to lean into different conflict styles and recognizing that people are different. Also recognizing that culture really matters in conflict style. Some families, they might be going at it, in a way that really works for them. They're very vocal, very verbal, talking a lot, talking loudly, talking over one another. That wouldn't work in my family. That isn't the way that I was raised, but that's normal for some people. So recognizing that there are differences, there's no one right or good way. And if we're in mediation and we're noticing the fast-paced talking, and I'm sitting there thinking that, no, I'm with you. And then we just pause. Is this working for you? And they look sometimes and say, yeah, of course. This is how we talk, This is how we communicate. So really just being mindful that people are going to have differences in their conflict styles and how they approach conflict culturally. Okay, step 3.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
do styles change depending on who you're interacting with?
Oh, we got a microphone on this. Do styles change is the question.
Do styles change depending on who you're interacting with?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, I can tell you that when I am Elizabeth Drake, Executive Director, I might have to be collaborating a whole heck of a lot more than maybe in my personal life or when I'm teaching a yoga class or something like that, and I'm responsible for this space and the safety of all the people. So learning how to flex in between your styles. You'll have a dominant style, and that's what the quiz will help with, is you take the quiz, that'll help you learn your dominant style, and then learn how to flex in and out of them. Learn how to understand that context really matters and is really important for when you might choose to flex in and out of those styles. Thanks for asking, Des. Yes, we got another question up front, Gail.
Could you repeat where we would go to get this communication style or conflict style test?
Yeah, it's Thomas Kilmann. It's the if you Google him, you'll find it. Kilmann, Kilmann, and then if not, I can send me an email or something, and I'm happy to forward you the specific place. Yeah. Okay, step 3, listening deeply. And I'm just going to poll the audience. How many of you think you're good listeners? Raise your hand. Oh, way to confess. I read a study recently because I was really curious about this. It's one of the most important things, and what I learned is that most people, there was one study that shows that about 95% of all people think they're good listeners. So you're hedging a little bit, and it's because I'm here, I can tell. What's that? Older. Oh, okay, yes. culture matters for sure, and your identity really matters. Yeah, I agree with you. In this study, 95% of all people think they're good listeners, and less than half of them catch half of what people are saying. So we tend to overthink that we're a better listener than we actually are. Now, if I think back to that awareness triangle, you know, all the thoughts that are going on in your head when someone's speaking with me, James is speaking with me, I'm thinking all these things, you know, all the feelings that are coming up, all the responses that I'm going to respond back to James. I'm figuring out my sentences as he's speaking, right? That's normal. That happens. And what compassionate communication does is ask you to try to suspend all of that as much as possible and to be more available, to really connect with someone as a human. What is this person trying to tell me? Often, the way in which we do connect with one another, for example, I'm thinking about my dog right now. I lost a dog a year ago today, so he's been on my mind a lot. And over this past year, you know, when I've spoken about it, the way that people connect with me is they say, oh, you know, I lost a dog too, and that's how we connect as humans. We want to share in that shared humanity together to let you know I've lost a dog too. And I love all those conversations that I have with people because I've learned a lot of dog lovers out there for sure. And what I would offer is that when you respond in that way of trying to connect with a human, you lose that ability to truly be available and present for somebody. So it's not uncommon, it's very common to want to connect with somebody. And this asks you to try to suspend that just a little bit longer, to really kind of get at the heart of the matter. Because I think for me, when I think about that dog, and I might cry, when I think about that dog, for my husband and I, that was the child that we didn't get to have. So for me, it was a much deeper, right? And you almost missed out on that conversation because you're like, I lost a dog too. You miss out on this deeper truth that someone might be willing to share with you this gift, this information. And so for me, like that was why that loss was so important, because we lost him so much sooner than we thought that we would, and because he took a space in our heart that didn't get taken up by a child. So in that way, you know, that's what happens when we try to connect with one another rather than listen really deeply. You know, so being okay with giving silence. In our world, silence is, I know, preach it, right, Beth? In our world, silence is very much undervalued, that pause, you know. In some families, it's not uncommon. You got to get in there, right? If you're going to say anything, you got to get in there. So it's a different way of communicating with people that kind of asks you to suspend that just a little bit longer to try to connect with someone and say, tell me more about that. I'm so sorry for your loss. Tell me more. So listening is really very important. Okay, practicing non-judgment. This is something that, you know, I keep saying every step, this one's really important. They're all important. They all come together to really help serve us in this better way of communicating. But practicing non-judgment, that means to be able to build understanding means to go more into this observation mode and not evaluation mode. And most people, including myself, we're problem solvers. It's easy to sort of evaluate, well, don't do that. You know, why would you do that? You know, even just the little ways in which we engage with one another can feel very evaluative as opposed to just an observation. So I'll give you an example of like what this looks like. Evaluation sounds like, she's terrible at meeting deadlines. And it might be true. It might be true. I'm not saying you have to become a saint. You can think this, but how are you going to communicate it in a way that feels more receptive? So observation would sound like this. She's not met the past 3 deadlines. It's just naming the facts as they are. It's taking the sting out of it. It's just presenting it the way in which you're observing it. It's not really putting any judgment on it. And we're judged so often in our lives all the time, and we judge each other all the time. Well, that's not what I would do. I would do this, you know. Those are ways in which we disconnect from one another. So being able to be there in a compassionate way really means taking your opinion out of it. You know, being available for that other person and really trying to think about what are the ways in which I can start to use more observation-like words as opposed to evaluative words. And then when you really start to dig in really deep, you can come up with all sorts of ways in which words have a lot of sting to them. So really thinking about how to be mindful of your words, that's sort of a step that to this practice, is kind of thinking about evaluating the words that you're using and whether or not those are the right words. And there are small words that can be very triggering. Well, if you would just, you haven't done this yet? The little words that can come off and trigger somebody in a way that isn't necessarily what you meant. So, but is another one. And that'll be your homework, I think, for today. If anything, try to replace the word but with and. This can happen, and this can happen too. There's a lot of space for more complexity in our lives. Okay, I'm going to summarize all of this and put it all together that by saying, you know, as I mentioned, honesty and clarity, that's what compassionate communication is about with yourself and others. It requires you to bring respect for the other person. What is it that they're really after? And empathy as well. It challenges you to figure out what your needs are. If if you're in conflict with somebody because you're not doing something right that they want, you know, what is it that they need? What is it that you need? And we don't always have that ability and that space to figure out, what do I need? So asking yourself that question, if you're feeling heightened with somebody, what is it that I need in this moment? Maybe what you need is, I just need 5 minutes to clear my head, and then I'll come back and I can talk with you then. I'll walk away with some golden questions, and I have bookmarks for everybody, and they have the golden questions on here. We as mediators, this is your last chance saloon, is sort of what we say is, if all the things aren't working in mediation, you resort to the golden questions. And these are really critical that help get to the heart of the matter. What's your greatest concern? Just asking somebody that question when you're in conflict with them or when someone is elevated can really open the door for where you want to be. My husband is not a mediator, and I believe in the power of this ripple effect and how when we role model these things, we can spread this out into the world. And there was one day, he works for the legislature, and there was one day when he said to me, I used a golden question today with my legislator. So this is happening all over at the highest levels in our state, which is, I think, really important. It made me so proud because all I did was I posted this on the wall near the fridge. So if you don't have a need for a bookmark, maybe someone else in your life does. I'm having a habit of putting them in books when I put them in free libraries and sending them around, because I think it's really important that getting the message out that people know that these questions are there, and you never know how somebody is going to use them. So I encourage you to take a bookmark and think about these golden questions and how they maybe could be helpful for you. So I want to use the last many minutes that we have, 7 more minutes, to open it up for more questions if there are questions. Yes, and we'll wait for the microphone here. And also online, I want to pay attention to you as well. let us know if you have a question in the chat, and we will get to your question.
I find one of the most difficult communications is to deal with someone who's sarcastic. And I'm looking for guidance here, and I'm not quite sure where to turn. Can you help with that?
Yeah, me either. I like to tell people I do have a sense of humor, and sarcasm is just not really one of them. It's very prevalent, I think, in our society, and I do interpret it as a way of digging at people that's unnecessary. So while I don't know how to answer your question specifically, because this is one that I'm still really grappling with, but I think for me, I would stay grounded in what I know and what I do. So that's absolutely what I would do. I think I would ask that person, tell me more what you mean by that. Because part of what compassionate communication is about is not the blame of like, can you believe that guy? His sarcasm is off the charts. It's really about this person is someone who's experiencing harm too, and here's how they're interacting in the world. So that's the first thing I try to do is maybe kind of reframe and know that this is a human being who, this is how they're expressing themselves. It doesn't really work for me, but tell me more about that. So I think that's the best I can do, and that's a challenging one because this is a bigger picture cultural issue that I think I see in the world. I was doing a training just yesterday, and that was brought up. So yeah, it's officially an anecdotal trend now. Yes.
Well, even to just speaking as somebody who speaks fluent sarcasm, like even to me and with my friends, it's just a way of communication. So even just labeling it as digging at people, or that we're trying to insult you, or you're taking it as some sort of negativity, is one way. It's frustrating for us, those who speak fluent sarcasm as a certain neurotype or communication. It can be rooted in trauma in which we are using humor to deflect, or so there's different ways. But I have faced growing up a lot of that feedback that people will label it as digging at people or insulting me or doing this, and we can take that feedback, but at the same time it's like, why are you labeling it as negative? Or what is it like? If I'm making a sarcastic remark about your blue hair and you don't have blue hair, so that was just kind of a thought that flew through my head when you said, I take it as a dig at people. And I was like, I hate that. I hate that people think that it's a dig at people. It's just a communication type.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Because I think that what I hear in that is that there are different ways of communicating with one another, and there are different ways that generationally we communicate with one another as well. And so I think going back to what I said, which is first and foremost, having compassion for that person and where they're coming from and how they were raised, right? So yeah, I think that makes sense why you would feel that my comment about taking that as a ding at people would be offensive. So I apologize for that.
One of the most difficult situations that I come across is someone who will not take no for an answer. How any help there, because any no just results in a, well, you can't mean me, I'm special, I'll go find someone who can say yes, is what it feels like to me. And yes, we listened. Yes, I hear you. Yes, I understand. No, it's not as important to me as it is to you. So the answer is no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one, I would say to congratulate yourself for having clear boundaries that allow you to say no, because I think that's something that not all people can do. And even culturally, there are going to be differences and different expectations of people too, and how they respond in that way. So I'm thinking, for example, women or mothers or people with children where it feels like you can't say no and you have to do the thing. So being clear on your boundaries, I think, is a really first and important step. I think in that situation, it sounds like to me that trying to communicate why you're saying no and really digging back into what is true nonviolent communication and expressing why that is a need for you. I need to value my time. I need to value my time with my children. It's not about you. This is about me, and why I'm saying no is because all of these other values are the things that I'm trying to put first and foremost. And I think that that's the best way of approaching it in a nonviolent communication way, is to really lean back to your values and maintain your boundaries as well. You can always make requests of people. You can make an offer of someone too. I can't do it this time, but I'd be willing to do it next time. Does that work for you?
Hi. For folks who don't know me and for folks online who can't see us all individually clearly, this is Liz Clement. And I'm sorry to kind of step the conversation back, but I think it's important to continue a little bit that focus on sarcasm. I think Alex raised a really good, important, and well-spoken point. As I heard it, that, sometimes sarcasm is, it's a manifestation of trauma, or it's a communication style, or it's driven by it's a neuro communication style. Those things are true. And sometimes it is not those things. Sometimes trauma is used as a tool for control, and can be experienced in and can be used as a tactful, willful, kind of violent maneuver in a conversation. And I think it's important to recognize that also, because especially in conversations where people have experiences with both of those things. Maybe one person has more comfort with sarcasm than the other, and it can be because they have had those different experiences. They're all valid, they're all real, and my hope for myself is to continue with a greater understanding, so that I can remember that sometimes when folks bring sarcasm into a sensitive conversation with me, that is just them processing and communicating in the way that they do and the way that they can. And at the same time, my hope is that more people can understand as well that the impact that has sometimes further extends that trauma. Even when it's not willful and when it's not meant, that happens too. So, just something to consider.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for really demonstrating the use of "and" in all of that. That's one way to really say there's space for both things. There's space for why this is real. There's space why other people experience it in a harmful way. And we could acknowledge that both of those things are true. At the DRC, we believe in self-empowerment, and we believe in negotiation and collaboration. And if there are ways in which this doesn't work for you, really putting that back on, like, when you speak to me in this way, it doesn't work for me. And giving people that self-empowerment to have the autonomy to choose how they want to engage with the world.
So there's a question online, the first one. If you could respond to that, and then I'll get to James.
It says, I can recall many instances where I believed I had asked a neutral question of someone, but their response felt like an attack or accusation. I don't know how to recover from that and de-escalate the conversation. Yeah, I think this is what we all struggle with, for sure. And I think without knowing the specific question, there are lots of ways in which a question might feel attacking. Yesterday in our training that we were doing, someone used an example of coming out of the shower and saying to her husband, "You haven't done the dishes yet?" And she expressed that more as just a real thing, not an accusation. He experienced it as an accusation. And I'm thinking, I can see ways in which they're both true, right? She didn't mean it that way, but in the using yet and asking it in that way, it could be so many things, Ruth. It could be the words that you're using, the tone in which you're delivering that, the context in which you're delivering it. So these are all things to be mindful of. And then I think, but if there's a tip that I want you to walk away with, it's first and foremost not taking it personally. When people offer feedback, they're offering it because that's about their needs. So we automatically think, I did this thing wrong, and I feel so much shame for this thing that I did wrong. And that it's almost always not about you at all. It's about the other person's needs. So I would tell you, without knowing the specific question, to really just dig into what do you think that person needs? See, in the second question, sarcasm again. This is a very, very hot topic, for sure. And I would just say that I think that this is something to continue to think on, because what is most important is that, as I mentioned, there are different generational differences for sure. We are leaving the planet behind in a much worse off shape for folks who are going to be left to clean up all the messes. So it makes sense to me in a lot of ways to have compassion for people, and understanding, and to know that most of the time it's not about you, it's about the other person. So digging into that.
So one last question.
One last question. James, thank you. Take us home.
As a comment, I grew up in a family of aggressive speakers that interrupt each other. And it took me a couple of wives to realize that's rude. And I tried to introduce my family to the talking stick, which is a wonderful concept, and they still don't go for it really. And as to sarcasm, my family's sarcastic too. And when I studied vocabulary, I realized the word is made up from two Greek roots, sark, which is flesh, and chasm, which is tearing. So sarcasm can be flesh-tearing, and I think the important point is to realize that different families have different communication styles that can be really abrasive to folks who aren't used to it. And so I've tried really hard to break my sarcasm habit.
Thank you, James. I couldn't think of a better way to end. Thank you all for being here, and I'll send around the bookmarks. If you have more questions of me, we are a resource that's been available in the community for more than 3 decades. We're not going anywhere. Send me an email. I'm happy to talk with you. It also sounds like if folks are interested in more training, to let Gail know, and we can always make that happen. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you all for coming, and Elizabeth, thank you very much. That was just so timely. Very, very helpful. I will say that my husband Fritz and I are reading a book by David Brooks called How to Really Know a Person, and it's along the same lines as what we've heard today. And so if you're interested, it's at the library, and he's, David Brooks is a columnist for the New York Times, and he's an introverted person who's really pushed himself to learn these lessons. So we're reading it to each other, and we're finding it very helpful. So I want to say along the lines of what the LDC is doing, if you want more of these kinds of conversations or a specific class about a particular part of conversation or leadership or communication, please come talk to one of us. We're going to be working with the Adult Faith Formation Committee and getting more opportunities available through the congregation. So I hope you enjoyed this, and this particular talk was recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. And so let your other friends know that weren't able to make it today. And thank you for the people that joined us online. I really appreciate it. Okay, thanks very much. Have a good afternoon.
There's just a couple bits of feedback from folks online. Thank you and please come back. Request to leave some bookmarks at OUC for those of us online. And let's expand this to a class. Thanks, everybody.